In this video, we're going to finish up our work with exercise 33.9. We were in class the other night working on it, and we ran into a couple of issues right towards the end that prevented us from being successful. I've had a chance to come back to it and make a few tweaks to get things back on track and basically get them to work. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to scroll through really quick and show you some of the changes that I made. And as it goes with programming, sometimes you're not sure which of the changes you made that actually made it work. But basically, I was trying to solve an issue that was giving me a null pointer error, and that was actually due to a couple of different things. First of all, I wasn't entirely sure if we were connecting to the database, and the one way to make sure that you are is, first of all, if you are off campus, make sure that you use this Cisco AnyConnect software to make sure you're connected to the VPN, because the database will require a connection that's a VPN connection in order for it to work. You might wonder why that is. I know web people say, well, the databases on the websites work just fine when I'm off campus without having that VPN connection. And the component that's important there is that the web pages that you're grabbing are on the same server with the database, so they don't need to form an external connection. They're on the same machine. When we are working with an application that's external and we're not pushing it to a live web server, then we do need that connection. So make sure you have that in place. Some of the things that I did, and I kept getting little underlines and I had a few try catches in there, was the need for basically some sort of a try catch or an exception statement. And what it turned out to be is that given the option of putting in various forms of error catching, and I'm just going to get rid of that so you can see what I mean. If I click in that little underline there, do Alt Enter, you can see the choices it brings up. You could try any one of these techniques, but for whatever reason, this is the only one that really was effective, because I really didn't need the catch part of it. I just needed to make sure that the database didn't fail. So that exception, throws exception, went on to any of the methods that use database interaction. So for example, insert has that, and update has that, and view has that, as well as the initialize and the initDB. So basically anywhere there's a database interaction, it's just a smart thing to throw that in, and it eliminates a bunch of try catches and keeps your code a little bit simpler. The other thing that I ran into as a problem were the index values for the fields and how they were being applied. We did discover by looking at phpMyAdmin that some of these need to correspond directly to what's in the database, right? So if you're working with a particular column, you have to work with its column ID, which is enforced by the database structure, not something that we program in. So you can see that by doing that, I was able to remove any of the try catches here, and we're back to very simple and clean code. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to scroll up to the top and just kind of show you an overview of the code. So I'm going to scroll, pause, scroll, pause, etc., so you guys can see all the code, copy if you will, or use it to maybe make fixes to your own code. Okay, so here's the top 21 lines. Another change that I made is I added private declarations to all the variables up here. I don't believe that's actually necessary, but it's good practice. Alright, here's the initialization and the constructor. From there, we go into the initialized database portion. This is where we make the connection to the database, load the driver, set up all the queries in advance, and assign them to prepared statements, so that in the other parts of the application we just have to utilize that one keyword, and it forms the connection, prepares the statement, and feeds the content into it. This statement does have a catch on it, and that's because I do have a try catch inside. This is the one that is necessary compared to the others, mostly because there's a series of database steps there. Alright, so here is insert and update. These are just as simple as some of the things that you would see in your book, and it should be that way. It shouldn't have to be a complicated set of code. We're just taking the fields that we have, whatever new values were typed in. When we hit the button, it will execute all of these. This is what view looks like. Now, I did a couple things here, and frankly, a couple of them might not actually be necessary. I did throw in this result set and preset it to null, and this is when I was trying to figure out the null pointer error. So really, for all I know, I could probably remove the null portion of it and it would work just fine. But I left it, and no harm done. Clear is probably something you already know. That was the same thing we did right when we do the constructor right at the very top. And then all the rest is the sets and the gets for every one of the little data fields up at the top. So just a refresher on that one if you've never done it before. And I know sometimes when we learn a new piece of software we kind of gloss over certain things. It is basically the fact that you can take all this code here, and you don't even need to highlight it, frankly. You just have to do insert code, and then you can do getters and setters, and then when you choose that, you can actually, add little checkboxes for the things that don't have them yet, and you want to do it selectively. You don't need to have them there for every field. It's just a handy tool for doing things. In fact, chances are this application would work fine without any of the gets or sets because we're not really utilizing any of them. Another thing that was kind of interesting here when I was troubleshooting is I looked back into the chapter, and one of their examples where they were working with the student table, they had inside here a little bit of code for working with sending data in a serial fashion. So you might have a little directive like this, and in some situations, depending on the type of data that you're sending back and forth, where you're getting the data from, this is not a bad thing to add, because basically what it does is it takes whatever information that you have and serializes it, meaning it takes it and turns it into a string of text so it can more easily be transferred from spot to spot. It turns out it's not really necessary, but if you had that in as well, that's okay. It was just one of the troubleshooting steps that I used to solve the problem, and it turned out that really wasn't the fix. The fix was really kind of overcoming all the null pointers, which are really being caused by the fact that we didn't have some of these error catching or exception catching mechanisms in place. Basically things that would crash the program if certain components aren't right. So if you want to put that in, that's fine. If you don't worry about it. It's not a requirement. So I'm Control-Zing my way out of that. I'm going to save it. And here's another little trick that I didn't mention in the main video that we did, the one that was an hour and some minutes long. And that is, when you're doing this kind of work, every time you run the program, it's kind of transparent to us, but if you remember in Java 1, we would always compile and look for errors, and then we would run the program. And then eventually you learn that you can just hit the run button and it kind of does it all at once. Now, the problem with that is sometimes it leaves little fragments of things in memory that can interfere with the things that you're doing. So what's recommended, and you can do this in Eclipse as well, is if you come over to your project node and just give it a right click, if you run the clean command, it blows a lot of things out of memory and kind of gives you a clean slate from which to compile. And then, of course, anytime you compile, you end up building, and building is really the compiling step. So what I recommend that you do after you make a significant change, especially if things aren't working right, is you come in, right-click that project node, and then click Clean and Build, and you can see it does a bunch of stuff. Now, there is a little error coming up here, but that has to do with the architecture of the program, not with anything that we've done wrong. All right. Another thing that you might find is stopping and starting the internal web server sometimes helps. but that should not be necessary. Alright, so now that I make sure I have my browser selected up here, and I like to run it in Chrome. It should work in any browser though. And then if you click the play button, it'll bring it up in the browser. And here's our interface that we created. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to bring up the database, and I want to be able to look at what's in the database just so that I can make sure the data is going in and out correctly, and that when we look at something, we're looking at the thing we're supposed to be looking at. So my database is Java book, and we are looking at the staff table, and I'm going to do a browse, and that shows me the data. If I wanted to look at the structure, you'll see that this is all the columns listed, and you see the names. And one issue for me was that when I wrote the code in the program, I didn't use the capital N like the database, so I was always trying to tweak it, and then I decided to use phone instead of telephone, so I always have to be mindful of that. But here are the ID numbers for the columns. These are auto-generated by the software, by MySQL. So that's why we use the index values that we did. Additionally, we have the data. So you can see I'm about to type into the application the ID of 111, and I should pull back that information. So let's do that. So type 111 and click View, and you can see that the data was retrieved. Now if I wanted to update this record and actually put in information that might look a little better than what I have here, make it a little more official. Alright, and then I can do an update. And if I go back to my database and I do a refresh here, you can see that the information indeed did change. And we could also do an insert. Now before you do an insert, you should probably clear it. Come up with a new ID and type in some stuff. Some of these fields do have constraints based by based on what the database construction is. So for example, these two fields, this one only takes one character, this one only takes two, and this one must be a number no longer than 10, and this is you can put anything in there, I think. Alright, so the ones I can put anything in, I'm going to do so because I really don't care about the data at this point. I just want to get it to work. And then I'm going to click Insert, and you can see I got my little message that it worked. Let's go back to the database again. I should have a new record here at the bottom that shows me that it is indeed working. Alright, and we already know that clear works. That's one of the first ones we got to work because that was so easy. And then if we want to look at one of our fields again just to make sure. Now the other thing that you should notice, what's really cool about this is I'm not reloading this page at all. This is just sitting here running. Every time I click the button, it runs the code that's on the server. So it's actually kind of nice because it behaves more like a standard application. That's really one of the objectives here with Java Server Faces, is that we get browser windows that run an application that behave like an application. Because if you're running a regular application, you're not refreshing the screen every time, reopening the application every time you're doing something. It just sits there and runs, and it just reacts to whatever actions. Now, given the fact that we've done some, what is essentially very simple database interactions here, and you can see what a challenge it is, but once you have that stuff intact, it works really well. It's just a matter of overcoming those initial little hurdles. So this is a little bit of a success here, I'd say, and hopefully enough to help you guys finish your work. I know this chapter has been a challenge, but it's critical in terms of us finishing our final project, where we are going to require database transactions in order to build the application. So this is a vital step, and it doesn't matter which technology you use, whether it's a regular GUI application or one of the web technologies that we're learning. It is necessary. The other thing I want to go back to is this Services tab up here, where we can actually look at the databases that we're using. So for example, you see that Kronos is listed here. If for some reason your database is not listed, you need to go through the process of right-clicking, doing a new connection, and then choosing the type of database that you want. And the other thing I want to make you aware of is notice that Java actually provides what we call an embedded database, and that's something that basically will sit with the application, that you do not need a database server to run. And for simple applications, believe it or not, this might be your best choice. Now, if we're running a real big, robust application where multiple users and applications need to access it, then you do want to use a standard connector. But in our case here, we would do this. We choose MySQL, and then we put in all the same information we use to do our connections normally. So, for example, I don't want to mess with my Kronos one because it's already set up. Actually, you know what? I can, because I have several accounts on Kronos, so why not just do it? The port number can stay the same. And then the database itself, of course, is going to be named like this: username. I'm trying to remember my database names now. Oh, let's choose guest book is probably a good one from our PHP class. Excuse me. Username, your password, and then of course you can test the connection to see if it works. And if you can get that, you're pretty much all set. And you can see what it does here is it actually creates the connection string for you, and it has this tendency to add a whole bunch of stuff at the end of it that really effectively you can delete. And I'm usually in the habit of doing that, but it kind of also explains where some of the null pointers come from, because you see that right here it says 0 date time behavior equals convert to null. So sometimes that is the part that's throwing the null pointer exception as opposed to the variables and objects that you're building. So that's something to be mindful of. I'm deleting it. I'm going to click next, and then if there's a schema you're worried about, you can choose one, and otherwise it throws in this piece too, which you can you know, just understand basically it's an identifier that's used here. It's not something that's the actual connection string. So this is something that you could change. So if I wanted, I could say Kronos example, and then just say finish, and then it'll list here. So what this basically does is it leverages the internal tools, pulls in all the drivers and everything, allows you to test the connection, then you have that resource there that's available. And there's some other really neat things that you can do with these databases as well, and that is you can actually use some of the built-in tools. And you know, some of this stuff might be helpful for you doing your final project, but you can actually bring in an entire database with complete CRUD operations with a pre-configured script that they have in NetBeans. Now, if you're really interested in doing that, you can, and a lot of professional developers do that so they can save the time writing the database scripts, but it doesn't mean that it's going to 100% work right for your situation. Now, if you are interested, one way that you can do that is you can right-click your project node and then choose from here Entity Classes from Database. Sounds pretty promising, doesn't it? So if you go ahead and you choose that, you can actually, and you see what it's doing here, it's automatically attaching to Kronos. It finds all the tables, and if I were to, for example, come here and add staff, now it's saying include related tables, I'd probably uncheck that if I just want the one. But I have the capability here of taking everything and pulling it over, and then what it does, you know, and I'm actually gonna just do this one table and click next. We do need to provide a package name here, so I'm just throwing that in, or maybe example is better. And then I'm just going to go ahead and click next, and it gives you a couple of options here, and I'm just going to go with all the defaults. Now you can see what it did is it built a new package folder underneath the source directory, and of course it creates something named staff, which is maybe a little confusing, but if you open up the file and look, take a look at all the stuff that it did here. It set up a bunch of predefined queries and structures and pulled in all the capabilities from the database, even suggests regular expressions, does all the getters and setters. So basically what we have here are a bunch of named queries. So if I just wrote a little bit of code and used this, it would execute whatever queries here. And of course you can always add to the queries as well. But the whole point of this is that it gives you a very quick way to just pull in the content. So that you might find a little revolutionary. And really, you know, we're learning basic stuff right now. Even though we're in Java 2, we're learning enough to kind of arm you to make you dangerous. But if you were working out in the field with a language like this, you're going to start to discover that these IDEs do a whole lot more than just kind of show you where your errors are, but they can actually help you build applications in a really rapid fashion. So this is a tool that you might want to explore. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to remove that from the project, and here they're saying safely delete with usage search. So if you were removing something that might affect other things, you would click that box. In our case, that's not the case, so we can safely delete it just like that. Alright folks, that wraps up this video. Hopefully it maybe relieves a little stress from, I know this assignment is probably overdue for most of you, and please don't stress out on that. I'm taking that into account with the grading and kind of building in a little bit of grace for everybody. I do want everybody to succeed with this. Alright, I'll see you in the next video.